All righty, everybody. It is time for Right Tree, Right Place with our very own Kate Donohue. She is a tree steward, master gardener, and a member of the Forestry and Natural Resources Commission in Arlington. Kate's also the coordinator for the Bon Air Sunny and Shady Demonstration Gardens. Oh, wait, you said before that was different now.
Not shade, just the sunny garden.
Just the Sunny Gardens, excuse me. And works with Eco Action Arlington on the Tree Canopy Fund program. Kate is brilliant, and I hope you all enjoy this talk as much as I do. Take it away, Kate.
All right, thank you. Welcome, everybody. This is really, I think, a very fun topic. There's a lot of things. I mean, I think all of the tree stuff is fun, but, some of it is a whole lot more scientific and learning a lot of vocabulary, whereas right tree, right place is just... It's a lot more dealing with people and what people want and trees and what trees want and trying to bring the two together. So the other thing I was going to say is just shout out questions, and I'll be asking questions. If you have an answer, just yell it out. That's fine. We're going to try this. If it doesn't work, then we can always go back to using the chat.
But chat.
Yeah. But we'll try to see if we can get this so it's a little more like an in-person lecture. So does anybody have ideas for why it is important for the right tree, right place? What specifically does this topic address? You have to unmute yourselves.
Shoot, longevity.
Yes, just for the health of the tree. Anything else?
So it'll survive.
Yep. Absolutely. Planned obsolescence. Look what happens to our street trees so often.
So it doesn't interfere with other things like electrical wires or things like that.
Exactly. You don't want a tree creating more problems than it's going to solve, or you don't want to have a nice, beautiful tree you planted and then discover you have to take it down because it's in the wrong place. All right. So first of all, we're just going to go through a few of these. As some of you pointed out, the health of the tree. Does anybody have any idea of what happened here with these shrubs, where the bottom, almost half are just all brown? What might have caused that?
A weed whacker?
I don't know.
Heat from the sidewalk?
Salts. You're not seeing it because it's clear now, but think about in the winter time when we get ice or snow. Not that we've had much of that in the last year or two, but they have those machines and they come through and they're spraying the salt and stuff to clear the sidewalks. And these little boxwoods here, they do not like that salt. And so if you have plants that are very sensitive to salt, this is the kind of thing that can happen. So a lot of times and here's the thing, when you're looking, actually, we're not doing pests and diseases, but I'll just do a little thing here. When you see a whole line like this, it tells you of something wrong. Then it's telling you that there is something wrong with the environment. In this case, it's salts from de-icing. If it was just one of these shrubs that had an issue and the rest of them were okay, I wouldn't think that. I would be looking at, some kind of pest or possibly, some other kind of issue that it might have. But this is an example of you have to know what your tree is sensitive to, what it wants, and also just what it doesn't want. And you can do some research and find out. For example, sourwoods do not like pollution, like from cars and stuff like that. So that's probably not going to be a great street tree or to have right next to someplace like a parking lot or whatever, where you're going to have a lot of pollution from cars, that kind of thing. Down here, this is dogwood. I'm sorry, what was that?
What do you think is going to happen to the boxwoods with all that dead stuff underneath it after this ice and snow?
I think they're probably doomed because of the boxwood blight anyway, which is a different situation. Here, I usually, and I can't say I'm an expert on boxwoods. Usually, though, when you get this kind of damage, it depends on whether you can cut it out and new growth will replace it. I have a feeling that you can't do that with boxwoods. Some things, if you cut it back they have what they call adventitious buds, and new growth will come out, and in a couple of years it'll look green and lovely, as long as you don't have that same problem happening again. But other times, if you like, especially with evergreens, if you cut them back like you're trimming them to get them off the sidewalk, and you think, oh, you're going to get a flush of new growth, you won't. And it just looks like a bunch of dead branches, because that's what it is. And I honestly have to say, I'm not dead certain which category the boxwoods go in. But I would think that they should probably be replaced with something else. It's my best guess on that. Good question. Let's see. This is dogwood anthracnose, which is a disease that dogwoods get. It's a problem. And there's a lot of, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. But dogwoods are small, basically understory trees. And so they like to have some shade. And there was some people were making the case that, you wouldn't have as much of a problem with anthracnose if you planted them in full sun. But then your dogwood isn't going to thrive under those conditions anyway. So your best chance here is probably to get, if you're worried about this, is to get a disease-resistant version of the dogwood. Does anyone know what's going on here? I'll give you a hint. It's an ash tree.
Ash borer?
Ash borer, exactly. The emerald ash borer digs into the bark and it lays its larvae. And when the larvae comes out, it does all these squiggly things as it eats the cambium layer. And it kills the tree, basically. And what happens then is the tree dies and all other bugs get in here, and then your woodpeckers and all the bug-eating birds and everything go after it, and the bark just gets stripped off. If you ever go out to Roosevelt Island, you will see so many dead ash trees, and you look at them and they look exactly like this. In fact, that might be where I got the picture. But that is emerald ash borer. Who knows what this is?
Spotted lanternfly.
Correct. The spotted lanternfly, which is kind of apparently, I'd always heard it is especially dangerous to things like fruit trees and grapes and that kind of thing. But I guess they can go after oaks and other types of trees as well.
Maples.
We're still learning about how much damage the spotted lanternfly is going to do. So the tree of heaven is first of all, it's our most horrible invasive tree from China ever. It's really awful. But it is also the host plant for the spotted lanternfly. So if anybody did want a tree of heaven for some reason, just this alone would be a really good reason to not have it. And then down here, this is just a picture of just a horrible place for any tree. The soil is so compacted that the chances of a tree thriving in a situation like this is just not good at all. So the other, yes.
I'm sorry, I just wanted about the lanternfly and the tree of heaven. So it's a host for the tree is a host for the lanternfly, right? So
Right.
does that mean that it's going to lay its eggs and
Yes.
so, but it won't kill the tree, will it?
No.
Yeah. So okay.
No.
Yeah.
So it's just the way milkweeds are hosts for monarch butterflies. The tree of heaven is the host plant for the spotted lanternfly.
Yeah. So it'll just cause them to multiply. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
Right. No, that's fine. In fact, Arlington Parks is looking, they want us to tell them if we find them so that they can take those trees down. The problem is they're also in a lot of private property as well. But I think that's something that is, it's definitely worthwhile knowing. And if you happen to know where a tree of heaven is living in a neighbor's yard or something like that, letting them know the issues it can cause. Now, I know we've all seen situations like this. It's maybe not quite as drastic as this one, but the issues with tree branches and wires are everywhere. And it's just horrible the way the trees get mutilated like this. But they shouldn't be planted under the wires in the first place. Personally, I'd love to see all the wires be undergrounded, but that's very expensive and it's not going to happen probably in my lifetime. So in the meantime, there's no reason to set up a new tree to be in a situation like this where they're just going to be chopped and pruned so that they're not in danger of taking out the electricity. All right, another one is avoid planned obsolescence. And what I meant by this one was, I can't believe that anybody planted a tree in a situation like this. And it's just, I mean, I don't know how this tree was actually living. I mean, you can see the bark is like all kind of chewed up over here, but how it gets any water or nutrients at all, it's just not good. So especially when we're looking to plant in parking lots, street trees, that kind of thing. And you'll learn a lot more about this as you get more into the training, but it's really important to make sure that trees have the best soil situation that they possibly can. They are watered and that they're cared for so that those trees, which, let's face it, you're not going to see any 400-year-old oak street trees, but they should be able to last a whole lot longer than they generally do. And fortunately, we are learning about a lot of ways that we can improve the chances for trees in urban situations like this. You want to avoid damage to sidewalks and things like this. This is Wilson Boulevard, which is where I live at the top of the hill here. So lots of these pictures are from that neighborhood. And as you can see, they planted these willow oaks, gosh, probably 25 years ago, 30 years, it's been a long time. And now all of these roots are like all over the place. And the sidewalk, as you can imagine, is cracked and buckling as well all over the place. So that is an issue. The interesting thing here too is that there is not, it is not 4 feet, which is kind of the minimum now for having space for street trees. And I have not gone out and measured it, but I know that is not 4 feet. And those are big trees. So putting a big tree into a small little place, either the obstruction will kill the tree, or the tree is going to take care of the obstruction. And that's what you're seeing on this side. Okay, here is our famous tree of heaven, which, as you can see, grow absolutely anywhere. I mean, here it's just in this rubble. So we really do want to avoid invasives. And when you're talking to people, I don't think people actually ask for tree of heaven. I don't think it's something you see in nurseries. It's just kind of like if people already have it, it tends to spread everywhere around. But we do have other invasive trees. And a lot of times people, one prime example is Bradford pear. That was really popular for a long time because it had these white flowers. It was pretty, it was great for you. And it's a disaster. So when we're talking about invasive trees, it's have your arguments set. And so when you're talking to people, if they're saying, yeah, I think I want a Bradford pear or something else that is not a good tree, that you can nicely talk to them about that and try to convince them to choose something else. Another reason to plant trees is to help conserve energy. And if you have enough space, you can do, the wind blocks, but mostly in our smaller lots in Arlington, it's kind of, if you can plant trees on the southwest corner and in the south corners, that can really shade a house, and it can really help with keeping things cooler in the winter, or cooler in the summer, I'm sorry. So what do you think impacts urban trees the most? Any thoughts?
Space.
Us. So it's not enough to know trees, you have to know people as well. And the question that you are going to get more than any other question as a tree steward is people going to ask you, what trees should I plant? And the answer is a crepe myrtle. Now, I put this in as a joke because if you, when you have Vincent, our Arlington urban forester, He decries the crepe myrtles that we have absolutely everywhere as being, not the best choice of trees. Unfortunately, I mean, and crepe myrtles are beautiful and I can see why people plant them, but they do nothing ecologically, really for the biosphere, for the insects, for the pollinators, for the birds. And unfortunately, now we also have this scale that is going around. And so a lot of crepe myrtles are just kind of going the way of the chestnut. So we will not be, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of crepe myrtles being replaced with something else. So this will probably be a question that you're going to get as well. People say, I had this great crepe myrtle and now it's gone. And what can I plant instead? But the question to really ask the person is, what do you want from your tree? Because people have different ideas of what they want that tree to do. And some people want one that has flowers. Some people want to attract wildlife. They want something that has some winter interest. They want to shade a part of their yard. A lot of them, they want screening from the street, from their neighbors. They want to hide the air conditioner or, whatever it is. They want a tree that reminds them of their childhood because that's what they had when they were a kid. They might want a tree that will grow fast. They don't want to wait forever. But the biggest one I hear all the time, they're like, I really want a tree, but I don't want one that makes a mess. So we will talk about these. Some of these people, I think what they really want is like a telephone pole, because it's like, you will have leaves, you will have some needles, you will have, birds in your tree that will also make something of a mess. I mean, so although some trees are certainly a lot, messier than others. But once you know what it is that a person wants, then you can kind of narrow that down pretty quickly into a set of trees that have those characteristics and that they will hopefully enjoy. I bring this up. This is for Nora Palmatier, because this is something that she would always say. And she calls it the shark attack syndrome. And when it comes to large trees, and this, and Noreen and I talk, it's like every time there's a storm and somewhere in the metro area, a tree hits a car or a house or something like that. And it's like the next day you see tree crews out taking down large trees, and it just kind of drives me a little crazy. But it's called the shark attack syndrome, because if you had a whole big line of traffic waiting to get to the beach, and if you went and knocked on the windows and said, what do you think is like the most dangerous thing that could happen to you, on your trip to the beach? And it's like, oh, well, shark attack, and the answer is no. It's like probably getting run over by a bicyclist while you're trying to get across the boardwalk for your ice cream cone. I mean, this is what gets the press. It's like that tree that comes down and crashes through the roof, but it doesn't happen all that often. And if you have a tree that is well taken care of and is healthy, the chances of that happening are really minimal. But because people see these things and they worry about trees coming down, it's like they decide they're going to go ahead and cut down their large trees. And this is a really difficult conversation to have with people, because once people are convinced that their tree is out to get them, it is very hard to convince them otherwise. But we do what we can. We recommend arborists. We at least try to get them to slow down enough to talk to a professional and see if that tree is in fact a danger. But on the other hand, it's like perfectly healthy trees have dropped branches and, bad things have happened. So you can't, nobody is going to get a 100% absolutely for certain this tree will never damage anything. But at the same time, the chances that it will is minimal enough. And trees provide us with so many benefits that it is well worth the risk, in my opinion. All right, tree stewards, and this I find hard, because I love to tell people what to do when it comes to trees. But the rule is that we share our knowledge, and we assist them in finding any information that they need, either to choose a tree or to decide what to do about a tree, or to learn more about whatever they think is happening with their tree. But we are not professional arborists or landscape designers. So we're kind of like, we're trained amateurs, if you will. And if people want to have really professional grade information, they need to be referred to an arborist, especially if if they're concerned about diseases or structural issues with their trees, or, landscape designers if they're coming at it from that side. All right. So encourage people. I mean, I think planting a large canopy tree is kind of like buying your house almost. I mean, this is an important decision. You need to put a little time into it. So they should research their site, look at how much sun and shade they have, check how wet the soil is, maybe do a soil test and see what additions might need to be made there. They can look at books, photos, internet sites. We always push the EDU sites because those are going to be giving you the straight scientific information as opposed to somebody trying to sell you something. And we encourage people to visit arboretums and just take a look at the trees that are in their neighborhoods and in their parks, and to get ideas about what they might possibly want. So if you're going to, plant an oak tree in a good situation, that tree could be there for hundreds of years. And that's what we're encouraging people to do, and to think about, what that might mean, so it gets the best chance possible to thrive. It's important when you're looking at resources to check the dates. The spotted lanternfly wasn't around a few years ago. It really wasn't on anybody's radar. When I took this tree steward training back in 2006, I'm not even sure we had much. I mean, the emerald ash borer might have been a relatively new thing then. We knew about dogwood and anthracnose, but every year there are more diseases and more pests that we are finding that are impacting trees. And so it's important to to be up to date. And if you're going to look at information, if you're seeing that information is from, 2005, you might be, okay, this is good, I'll read it, but I want to also find something that is more recent so I can make sure there isn't some new discovery that I should know about that would impact my decisions. And another one is the USDA zones. All right. In 2012, we were a 7A. Now, depending on where you are in Arlington, you're either a 7B or an 8. Kirsten Buell's the extension agent. She is encouraging master gardeners to plant zone 8 plants, which to me, it's wild that we have gone from a 7A to an 8 in really very few years. But this is the world we live in. So this is also going to have a big impact. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on when we talk about climate change and how this is impacting what we're doing. And another thing is our invasives knowledge has increased. The example of the Bradford pear, I mean, that was marketed as a sterile cultivar that would just solve all kinds of urban street tree problems. And if you ever drive to Tyson's in the spring, you'll see as you're going off 66, all this like beautiful sea of white of trees in bloom. And those are sterile Bradford pears that are not sterile after all. So yes, we find out sometimes things are not as they are advertised. And of course, it's important to look at the height and the width of the trees. We tend to have, people have houses with limited space here. We don't have, not too many people have an acre-sized lot where they can basically plant big trees, and it's great. We have a lot of things like overhead lines, we have pavement, sidewalk, we have buildings. What tree is actually going to fit in that area? That is something to consider. And it's not just the height, it's also the width. Sometimes I think in a small yard, if you have you might have a tall tree, but if the canopy ends up being very high, that can actually work. Whereas if you've got a red bud, which tends to be short because it's an understory tree, it's a small tree, but it can also get very wide. And that actually blocking your windows and everything, it might not be what you want. So it's not necessarily small yard, small tree, but it's how that tree actually grows, where the canopy ends up being, how does it lose its lower limbs? I mean, there's a lot of different considerations to make in that. And other resources for looking for right tree, right place, Casey Trees in the district, they have a lot of good information on their website, and the utilities actually have information on their websites as well. So those are some other resources you can use. The starting criteria, if you're, and when I did this slide, I was thinking of the Tree Canopy Fund. When people call up and they're like, okay, I want to get a free tree, come help me decide what kind of tree I should get. And you get your trusty tape measure, which you don't leave home without it. And you need to be 10 to 15 feet from the main wires. You don't want things necessarily underneath the smaller connectors, you know, the cable lines that come from the street directly to your house. Now, a lot of times if people are like, I don't care, put it under, you know, if my cable goes out or whatever, we usually don't deny trees for that, but it's something you probably want to think about a little bit. You need to be at least 10 feet from a building. You need to be 3 to 5 feet from buried utilities, from sidewalks and from fences. And if there are other trees in the yard, 10 feet from small trees and at least 20 feet from large trees. So you can see that, you know, by the time you get you think of your typical Arlington, Alexandria yard, by the time you measure all this out, there may be exactly one spot where you can, you know, legitimately put a decent sized tree. So this, on the information sheet that I gave you, I don't know if you had a chance to look at it, but we'll be looking at that later. But I include on that, the information is on the back of all of these criteria that you can measure out. So as you are doing your selection process, one of the first things to do is to look at the overhead wires. And this is literally from my front yard. And across the street, you can see the Dominion power people are across the street, and they're like, basically they come through and they just shave this beautiful cedar tree. And it's such a shame because that tree is really pretty magnificent, but it is too close to the wires. And then this is just to the, you see that tree, this is just the other side. And I just do this to just show you the number of wires that are there. And they just keep adding more. And so it's like, there are so many wires here. So when you get a call and you go out someplace, the first thing I do is I look to see, is this house on the side of the street that has the overhead wires, or are they one of the lucky ones that do not? Because they're on one side of the street and not the other. And so if you don't have the wires on your side of the street, you can do a lot more in terms of getting a big canopy tree. Whereas if you do have the wires and it's this kind of situation where you have relatively small front yards, you're going to be pretty severely limited in what you're going to be able to do. So the next thing is the available space. You know, where are my sidewalks, my fences, the driveway, the buildings, are there sheds, you know, other types of things. Over here, and this is a great picture to show what I was talking about with getting short trees as opposed to taller trees in these small spaces. These are short trees, but they are completely covering up the windows and everything else in that house. And maybe they want that. And if they do, then great, they've gotten what they've wanted. But if you can imagine, if you had a taller tree where the canopy was up here, you would actually see a lot more out of your windows and everything else, and you would still have the advantage of having a taller canopy tree. So that's just one of the things that you can kind of consider and look at. And this is just an example of, you know, and we see it all the time with all the construction that is going on around us. And people just treat trees as if they are rocks, you know? Ashlawn Elementary School is right behind my house. And when they were expanding the school, I went out there, and this is after I had gone down and talked to the workers and the principal and stuff. And there were some pretty decent trees, and they had all these cinder blocks and other things. And what did they do with them? There was all kinds of, and they could have put them all in the parking lot or anyplace else. No, they had them all around the base of a tree where it was just going to compact the soil and damage those roots. And I think it's just a thing where people are not thinking about what trees need. And they just figure they're going to be fine. And we can just, you know, like I said, treat them as if they're inanimate objects. But these trees are having a rough time, and they would have a rough time anyway because they are so close to this sidewalk. But now with all this other stuff going on and having all of these materials compacting the soil and creating damage that way, it's going to be even more difficult for them. Oh, this is a fun one. So now we're back in England in some, I don't know, one of those Victorian mansion things. But I saw this. Who knows what this is? This is a native to us. I'll give you a hint.
Magnolia grandiflora?
Yes, it is indeed a Magnolia grandiflora, our southern magnolia. And the reason I threw this in here is because I've spent the last 10 minutes telling you about how we have to measure at least 10 feet from the building, and we've got to do all of these other things. And I would say, unless you're going to, you know, be all British about this and decide you're going to exfoliate a Magnolia grandiflora on this building, which they have managed to do, and it looks fantastic. But I would not recommend this, you know, to the average person just trying to get a tree in their yard. But it's kind of like the exception that proves the rule maybe a little bit. So anyway, I just had to kind of throw that in there to say, except there's always somebody who has managed to defy all the rules and still have it work out. The next thing you want to look at are the conditions. How much sun does that area get? Sun is one of the most important things. Trees, like all other plants, they all need sun. Most of your big canopy trees are going to want more sun rather than less. But we do have some understory trees, and we do have some mid-sized canopy trees that really do appreciate having some shade. So it's important to know what the conditions are, because if you've got a spot and they're only getting sun for half of the day, that is going to really reduce the number of trees that are going to do well in that particular spot. There is always a tree that will do well, but you need, you know, but you might have to hunt around for it a little bit. This is a situation, this is where I was really thinking about water more than anything else. This is an oak tree that is not doing well. The leaves are turning brown. This could be, this is likely from drought. It could be other things. It could be root rot. It could be some kind of disease or fungus or something like that. But one of the things that causes oak leaves to do this is if you have extensive drought. So if one of the things that is happening now with our climate that I have noticed, and we'll see if this keeps going. I mean, none of us really knows what's happening with climate change, but it seems in the last few years, we've gotten into this pattern where we'll have a wet spring, drought, and then maybe a little bit of rain, like with this year, then drought, and then we'll get some, you know, rain in the fall. And when you look at the newspaper and it tells you that, you know, actually for total rainfall, we're about average. It's like, no, we're not, because instead of being spread out where the plants can actually use that water, it's all focused on a couple of big rain events. So you have drought, and then you will get one of these, hugely massive rainstorms where all of this water is dumped. The ground is so dry that so much of that water just goes right down into the sewer system and gets carried away. And then we have drought again. And this is really, really stressful on the trees, as you can imagine. And the thing with trees is that they can have a really, really bad year, and you won't really see the impact on the tree for a couple of years. So 3 years from now, you might be looking at a tree going, what happened to that thing? I mean, that looked really good, last year, and now look at it. And then you remember that 3 years ago or 2 years that you had a really, really horrific drought situation. And it may be just showing up in the tree because it takes a while for it to show up. So that whole issue of how trees get water. Now, of course, in our urban conditions, if we're planting trees in people's yards, we have the gator bags, people can water. I mean, care needs to be taken, but you can certainly mitigate those drought situations. If you're planting in the parks, or if you're looking at other types of situations, street trees often, it's something you really need to consider, because nobody's going to be saying, oh, this tree hasn't had water in 10 days. I'm going to go out and give it a drink. Here's another situation where you've got a tree and you get these big ruts, and then the water collects, and it's just the traffic can really mess things up. This happens a lot in the parks. You'll get those big park vehicles, and they don't have a whole lot of maneuvering space. And so you can get this kind of situation going on. And down here, we have some really, really happy bald cypresses, because they're in the middle of that bog or stream, but that is where they're meant to be, and they're really happy to be there, and they're big and they're healthy. And then here is another one of these situations where you're like, who in their right mind thought this was any way to plant a tree? But they did, and this just looks so awful, compacted, dry, above grade, with very little space for roots. Do we have any questions or anything? Am I going too fast, too slow? All right. And lastly, we're looking at the environment. I had mentioned before, some trees handle things like air pollution a whole lot better than others. You also have things like, your marshy environments, or things in a depression where it may be fine for much of the time, but if we get a big rain, then that water builds up there. And so they could be prone to root rot if they're not able to handle that. This was on the Virginia Tech campus in Blacksburg. And it was, I don't know if it was a cross or what, but this tree grew right around it, which is just kind of amazing. But I took the picture of this because it shows what can happen. And I'll bet you've seen this, where trees are planted next to fences, especially things like barbed wire fences and stuff like that, and they're too close. And eventually, if it doesn't really hurt the tree or kill it, the tree will grow around it and just kind of just incorporate whatever that obstacle is into the tree, which is amazing when you look at it and the tree has managed to pull it off, and it shows you how resilient these things can be. But that's probably not a great thing to do. And this is also very important when people stake trees, for example. One of the biggest issues you have is you'll plant young trees, you'll put stakes on them, and then you forget that the stakes are there. And then eventually it'll girdle that tree and kill it, because it'll go through those, the wires or the bands or whatever it is you're using will girdle that tree. It'll cut off destroy the cambium layer there, and then that tree is toast. So we have to be cognizant of these types of obstacles that may be in the way of trees. And if we do put them there ourselves, like with staking, then we need to make sure that we or somebody else is going out there and checking them and removing them after a couple of years. And then here are our friends, the deer, which are probably do more damage in Arlington than anything else. They will eat the trees. They will, deer will eat anything if they get hungry enough. And they like the twigs and everything of a lot of the young trees. The other thing that they do to harm trees is the male deer on their horns will get fuzz. And in the springtime, they want to rub that fuzz off of their antlers. And they do that by finding a tree, usually with, 3 inches caliber, something like that, 3 to 4, small trees, not little teensy tiny ones, but still young trees. And they will rub them. And what it does, it'll strip the bark off those trees. And if you go into any Arlington park, you will see trees with that kind of damage on them. And sometimes they're able to, when Nora was saying coat it, I don't know if you've learned that yet, probably not. You will learn about how trees manage to compartmentalize any damage that is done to them and have the bark that kind of like grows over it, and they kind of seal wounds off like that. So sometimes trees are able to do that and they can survive, but a lot of times it just kills the tree. So this is also a huge issue. One of the first questions I ask people is, do you have deer or not? Because if you have deer trooping through your yard, then you're either going to have to go above and beyond to protect your young tree from this, or for some trees, I wouldn't recommend them at all because they're like candy for the deer and they are just going to eat it to a nub. So that's something to consider. We have a lot of deer running around our neighborhoods. All right. So when you're talking about trees with homeowners, you're talking size, growth factors, form and character. Do you want a tree like an elm that has a big vase shape that is going to shade your whole yard? Or are you looking for something that might be nice and narrow that can kind of, differentiate your side yard from your neighbor's driveway? Leaves, flowers, fruit, bark, all of those things, really the aesthetics, and also just the availability. For maintenance, it's like, how much work is this tree going to be for you realistically? So you've got watering needs. I try to push trees right now that are drought tolerant, just because it seems to be the prudent thing to do. What is their preferred situation? Do they like being upland where they're on top of a hill or a ridge, or if they're on a slope? Usually when you hear the phrase well-draining soil, means that they don't want to be sitting in water. Okay. So if you're on a slope or something like that, the water will come down, it'll feed, it'll nourish your roots and everything else, but it's not going to stagnate there as if you were in the bottom of a basin. It'll keep moving down. So some trees like being in that upland situation or on a slope. Others are perfectly happy. They're like that bald cypress or some of the other trees that we have that really don't mind it being wet at all and actually prefer it. Those, if you've got a boggy area or an area that stays wet, perfect. There is a tree for you. Resistance to pests and diseases is really important. I would not recommend an ash tree to anybody right now because of the emerald ash borer. We do have American elms now that have been bred to resist the Dutch elm disease. So, if you really want an elm, that is where you should be looking for that. So if there are different trees have different pests, different diseases, and some of them are going to be more resistant to certain things than others. So that is something to consider as you're selecting a tree. Another one is pruning requirements. Some trees really don't require much pruning at all. In fact, out in the woods and everything else, trees are not getting pruned. But other trees, for example, tulip trees, They are our tallest native tree. They grow fast. They're really very beautiful, I think, in many, many ways. But what happens with tulip trees is as they grow up, they're the top branches shade out the lower branches, and they will naturally drop those lower branches. So in the end, when you see a mature tulip tree, it has this very straight, big trunk that shoots straight up and then a high canopy. Well, you might not want to have that tree really close to your house or your roof if it's dropping branches, if you're planting a new tree. So you want to know, how does this tree grow? Redbuds do the exact same thing, but they're smaller trees, and so they're probably not going to be damaging your roof or anything. But that is something to know as well with the redbuds. And then we get back to the ever popular mess. And of course, sweet gums have those spiky balls. You don't want that. My daughter used to live in Portland, Oregon, and I remember going there the first time, and downtown they had sweet gums that all over the place as street trees, and they're dropping those spikes. And I was just like, this does not seem like anybody thought this through, because I don't think you really want these things all over your sidewalks. Mulberries also, they drop those, their berries, and they're purple and dark, and their juice gets everywhere, and they can make a real mess. Same with the southern magnolia. I mean, all of these trees can be perfectly delightful if if you've got them back in your yard. But with the southern magnolia, I mean, they're beautiful. I love them, but they do shed their leaves, and they're very coarse and thick and leathery, and pointy, and they're just not real pleasant to deal with, if you're trying to rake them up or whatever. Okay, so that's something to consider is, if you're going to get a fruit tree, you're going to have animals, and some of that fruit's going to drop. It's like you just are going to have to accept that, right? So don't complain later. Then you got the whole air pollution, deer, and all of the rest of it. So these are all things to consider as you are making your selections. Okay, this is kind of my opinions, and I don't want to force them off on anybody else, but so far I'm sticking by them because I think they still make sense. But I'm also open-minded, and as new information comes out, I may very well change these. So if you come back and hear this same lecture in a couple of years, I might have something.
Unknown caller.
One of the things that we get a lot that people ask about, and it's something that we talk about, and there are a lot of different views here, but it's the whole, what about native versus non-native? And I'm sure that you will, usually I'm not going to be here later in October, which is when I usually give this. So I realize I'm right in the beginning of the training, and all of this might make more sense, and you'll learn more about it as you get more into this. But the native versus non-native is a very hot topic. And native plants are those plants that evolved in this area. Okay, so that the insects, the animals, they are part of the ecosystem. They are very often a very critical part of the ecosystem, and everything is a web, and everything is depends on everything else to create our own little ecosystem where everything can thrive. So native is the first choice, because natives are going to support an entire ecosystem. And if you've heard, how many of you have heard of Doug Tallamy? A lot of you, I hope. You will. I highly, highly encourage his books, which are very easy to read. He's got one on oaks right now. I've got his books. Noreen, I'll bet you can tell me what the titles are right off the top of your head.
Well,
But
Bringing Nature Home. I think Bringing Nature Home was his first book.
that's it. The first one was Bringing Nature Home.
And
And
then
then the other one was Nature's Best Solution or something. It was his whole
Nature's Best
idea.
Hope. Nature's Best Hope.
Yes, thank you.
And then he's got The Nature of Oaks.
Yes. which I haven't read yet, but I want to.
And,
Um,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
excuse me, I was just gonna say, we have, Alonzo Abogadas who's gonna be doing a talk, for the class. And I'm sure he's gonna touch on a lot of Doug Tallamy's work.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, Alonso's great. You're going to love him. All right. So Doug Tallamy's research, he's an entomologist in Pennsylvania, and his research shows that, for example, white oak supports like, I don't know, 400 and some odd different kinds of caterpillars. And then you have the insects at the end in order, and he uses chickadees, because, and I can't remember how many it is, but it's some ridiculous number of caterpillars that a chickadee has to feed its chicks to get them to the fledgling state. So if you don't have the oak tree that is going to be home to all the caterpillars, then you're not going to have your chickadees. And that's just one example of the entire food web that we live in. And I think when it comes to trees, especially because trees are by far the largest and the most important keystone species, if you will, in our ecosystem to support all of this wildlife, from insects right through the deer and everything else. And so that is why natives are the first choice. And, you know, it's kind of like if you want to have your irises and your peonies and your roses, but you've got white oaks, you're still doing a good job, okay? Because those white oaks are going to count for a lot in terms of providing ecosystem services. Although I would argue that you should be looking at natives all the way down, and I'm sure you'll be talking, you know, a bit about that too as you go along. But the trees, and especially the oaks and other keystone species like our native cherry trees and our native willows and a few others, are especially important. All right, after that category, oh, and I just want to say one thing about this. We are so lucky that we have an enormous variety of native species in this area. I remember reading someplace that in the Shenandoah Valley, our area of the Appalachians, has more diversity of plants than all of Europe. It's incredible. So we have just so much to choose from. So saying that you should really pick natives is not really limiting you a whole lot, because there are many wonderful natives to choose from. So the next, if people are like, nope, I got to have something else. If you're not going to go with a native, then non-invasive non-natives are not necessarily terrible. These are your saucer magnolias, your ginkgos. There's a lot of them. You know, there's a lot of trees and plants that are not going to be providing all the ecosystem services. You're not going to find the bees and the butterflies and everything else on them. But on the other hand, they're not invasive, and maybe they're doing something for you that, you know, is what you really need for your yard. And that's okay. Okay. You know, I don't want to tell people, no, you have to throw out grandma's peony or whatever. You have to cut down, you know, some tree just because it's not a native. If it's not invasive, then it's not hurting anything. It's kind of neutral. All right. So they're not terrible. And when I say they may be the only option, the specific thing that I'm thinking about is this. I am often asked for people who want to have a tree that's going to serve screening purposes, like an evergreen, you know, from their neighbors or something like that. And it's got to be fairly narrow. And there really are no natives that will do that. And if anybody finds one, let me know, because I have researched this for just years and years now, and I have yet to find something that could really do it. The closest one we've got is the Eastern Arbor Vitae. The problem with that is the deer love it. So they will eat it up to as high as they can get, which kind of destroys the whole screening thing. That's what you're looking for. So in that case, maybe a camellia or something like that will actually do what you need it to do. It's not going to be great for the ecosystem, but it's not going to really cause any harm either. And so that is what that category is. And then the last thing, of course, are the invasives, which are your tree of heaven, your mimosas. If you see those mimosas, I often see them popping up around 4 Mile Run. It's because the seeds have somehow gotten swept down and landed in the stream, and now they're, popping up all over the place. They are very pretty, but they are invasive and not good, right? So that is Kate's thoughts on that. So basically, yay for the oak, meh for the saucer magnolia, and boo for the Bradford pear. Here's some common invasive species in Arlington that you may know or be aware of. And there is a list of these that are out in the Arlington County website. Arlington, if you go to the Arlington County forestry page, in there you will find links, and they have lists of their recommended canopy trees, their recommended understory trees, or they probably call them ornamental trees. And they also have a list of invasive trees, and that gets updated on a regular basis. So that's a great resource. All right, a couple dishonorable mentions here. Leland cypress, which people just seem to love Leland cypress. I think especially contractors. It is evergreen. It grows super fast. And, they look really nice when they're little, like right here. You can see where people have nice little Leland cypress. Well, these here, this is at Ashland Elementary School. They were little too. And believe it or not, in between each of these Leland cypresses is a red maple, which you cannot even see right now. You can catch a glimpse of them in fall when their leaves turn red, but Leland cypress grows super fast and they're very big. And then as they keep growing, they do that thing where they shade out and drop their lower limbs. So people buy these for screening. And then what happens is the lower limbs fall off and they don't have the screening. And now they have this huge, enormous tree that is not doing what they want it to do, isn't particularly attractive, and is going to cost probably a good chunk of change to have taken down. So that is my problem with the Leland cypress. If you had a big, huge space, it might be one thing. Most people do not. Two others are silver maple and box elder. Silver maples, you probably already know. They're pretty. After the Dutch elm disease wiped out the elms, silver maples became a very, very popular street tree because they would grow fast, they were attractive, and they had a wide canopy. So they would do that shading of the streets that, people missed when the elm trees died off. Unfortunately, they are brittle and they tend to just drop their branches as well. And so silver maples became more and more of a mess and, quite frankly, a hazard. And so a lot of them, especially now that they're getting old and at the end of their lives, are being taken down. The thing about these I would not recommend planting them now. We have better options. So I think staying away from silver maples is probably a very good idea. The other is box elder. And if you were with me on the walk around Lubber Run, I pointed out box elder. And box elder is another one. It's just kind of like a real weedy tree. It's great in the parks and everything else, but it has a lot of the same thing as the silver maple. And it's probably just not something that I would recommend for somebody's lawn. The last one here is this Lombardy poplar, and I should stick a picture of it. You'll see these, those landscape paintings, usually of Italy, and you see these trees that are very narrow, very conical, and they're great. People like them because they grow fast, and they're one of those things like the arborvitae where you can just plant a whole bunch of them and you'll have this like narrow screening effect. The problem with these is, then they're not native, is it's like every disease out there seems to love these things. So would not recommend them for that reason. And the only reason I bring these ones up is because not so much the box elder, but people will say, oh, I think I want one of these. And you need to kind of be able to say, I think we can do better on that, because in the long run, this is probably going to create more issues than it solves. All right, back to climate change. I sure don't. I would like to have every year a panel discussion with experts and have them tell us what they think we should be saying about climate change, because everybody that I talk to that is in the field and is a professional has a different idea. Jim McGlone will say one thing, Vincent Furfay will say something else. I'll bet you Alonzo's got a different idea. Certainly, what's his name? Rod Simmons from Alexandria was very strong opinions on all of this. And I just find it fascinating because the science is, we don't know. I mean, we're just kind of in the very beginning of this, and we can go by our own observations and try to, do the best we can. But it is very, very interesting. Scary, but interesting. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. We have a question. Does Arlington have any regulations about either the county or contractors using natives?
Using what?
Natives.
The county does use natives. When a developer comes in and they have to plant trees in order to get their permits and stuff like that, the county makes them plant native trees. And they're planting native trees for the most part as street trees as well. There may be a few ginkgos or something out there for special situations, but the county is very strong on planting native trees. But in Virginia, there is really, if you've got your private property, you can pretty much do whatever you want, and there really isn't anything the county can say about it. So, for example, many of us would really love to outlaw English ivy. Some of these plants that we spend, God knows, how much of our time trying to get them out because they're invasives. And that would have to happen at the state level, and there's no way it's going to happen at the state level. So at least not at this point. So the county can't tell private property owners what to plant. But on public lands, Arlington County is doing a really good job on that. I don't really know about Alexandria so much. I would hope that they're, pushing natives as well. But I can't say that it's a policy in Alexandria the way it is in Arlington. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks, Tara says.
Okay.
Kate,
right.
it's 8:07.
Yes.
Do we want to take a short break?
Yeah. Let's go ahead and
You set the time limit.
Thank
What time?
you. Yeah, let's take let's see, I've got 8:07. Let's say come back at 8:15.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Just letting you know I'm back. I'm ready.
Okay, great. So do you have any questions?
I was the one that asked about the regulations. I wish we could regulate it. My in-laws, we sadly had to sell their house, but they had an acre of land in Alexandria, and
Wow.
probably about a 300-year-old magnolia. Is gorgeous.
And they cut it down.
Oh, well, no, actually, we noticed, we went back because they haven't done anything, and a developer bought it. We couldn't keep it because the taxes, even if they passed the house on to us, they've owned it since 1975. So,
Yeah.
but it would have been like $20,000, $24,000
Oh, wow.
just taxes. And, but we noticed that an arborist came around, you know, of trees to save, but from my husband to my kids, they climb it like a ladder. But gosh, I got to tell you, that freaking English ivy is so. There's another vine. What is it? I'm driving around and it's just like taking over all the trees, especially when you
Porcelain
drive
berry.
on the huh?
It's probably porcelain berry. And you'll see about now, it's getting its berries, and they're actually really beautiful. They're pink and then they turn turquoise.
Oh, wow.
That stuff. I mean, they started out selling that, and I think bittersweet was the other one, as like an ornamental vine. And it is just a bear.
Hey, is it not
If you get
Virginia
out in the
creeper?
woods. Mhm.
Sorry, is it not Virginia creeper? I think that's
No,
everywhere.
actually, Virginia creeper is native.
Yeah, that's a
And
native.
it will not hurt the trees. I mean, and we have a native grape that can get huge. And that's another one that if it's out in the parks and stuff, we leave it because it's actually great, you know, food for the birds and stuff like
And
that.
isn't that orange trumpet vine flower?
Yeah.
Trumpet creeper.
That's native too.
Also.
That's Virginia creeper also?
No, it's trumpet creeper.
It's so beautiful. I love that
It
one.
is pretty. It is that is really pretty. Yeah, and the native honeysuckle is also good. The hummingbirds like it. It's a vine. There's also a native honeysuckle bush. You know, the cultivars that you see in the nurseries are Kodiak orange and Kodiak red and Kodiak, you know, it gets these little yellow flowers. But the bush honeysuckle, the Japanese bush honeysuckle, is everywhere. It's like in the spring when things are just starting to come out. That's the first thing you'll see, like, as the understory in the woods.
But that's not our native.
No, it is not. And it is like the only thing there because the deer have eaten all the natives and this is there. And it's like absolutely useless as far as, you know, providing any ecosystem services.
I just don't know how to control though the damn English ivy. I mean, I feel like even in my own yard, the guy next door has it, so it kind of waterfalls over the fence.
Yeah.
And I just feel like I'm having this ongoing war constantly.
It is a war. I have done so much. In fact, I had my kid when she was little. That was her science project, how to get rid of English ivy. And we were very scientific about it. But what we found was, with our 5 different methods, the only thing that worked was pulling it and just staying on top of it. But it's such an issue because it keeps, as you say, it comes in from the neighbors, and then you have the birds dropping the seeds. So it takes you forever to get rid of it. And then you just have to, you know, keep an eye out for it. You know, it's just, and the tree of heaven is the worst because it has those roots that come down and then they go out horizontally. So you'll find little ones and they pop up and you'll pull everywhere. And now you're going to have 2 of them because you didn't get all the roots. It's just a nightmare. Yeah. The whole invasives. I'm sure you've got a whole entire class on invasives where everybody can vent on their their least favorite.
We do. Jen Soltz will be giving invasive, so we'll go into greater detail. Let's table all the invasives talk for the invasives.
Yeah.
But
there's a lot to talk about there.
Oh my gosh, yeah, we could talk for hours about all that evil stuff. Thank you.
All right, well, let's get back to this, back to the climate change. So this is just one thing that I'm kind of recommending to people now. So when you look at trees that are native to our area. Okay. And usually it's like when you ask for a description of what is native, it's like it's a plant that has evolved in this area, right? And the fact is, with climate change, we have some natives here that really just don't do well anymore. And so I suggest that people look at the ranges. And the range is at what like at what of the what is it? Well, the agricultural department's heat ranges. So we're now a 7B, right? In terms of our heat and cold. So if you're looking for a range of a tree that is good for zone 5 through zone 9, that is a wide range, right? That means they can go from pretty much Maine all the way down to Florida. And we have some trees that actually fit into that category. So when I'm looking at trees, I am usually not recommending trees where Arlington or Northern Virginia is at their southern limit. For example, sugar maple. Sugar maples were native here. We used to provide them through the Tree Canopy Fund, and they were on Arlington's list of recommended native trees, but they are not on the list anymore. And the reason is because it is now just too hot for them, because we were the southern end of that range. And now it's just, they just don't like the heat and humidity and everything that we are experiencing these days. So there is a native that has kind of dropped off the list. Not that it's not native, but that the climate has changed enough that it just doesn't thrive here anymore. So instead, consider when you're looking at these lists and they tell you, what zones, what the agricultural zones are for that tree. I try to look at where are we pretty much right in the middle. And if it's the wider the zone, the better. So if I see something that is only good up to a zone 6, I'm not going to, even though they say it's native here, I am not going to recommend that. Because I don't think it's going to do well. By the same token, if I see something and it's basically good for only zones 6 and 7, even though technically we're still in a zone 7, that is a really narrow range. And so I'm probably not going to recommend that one either. I mean, you may be, if you really love it and you really want to try it, go for it. But if you're like, no, I just want something that's going to do well, I would be looking more at your white oaks and some of these other trees that we have that can handle a wide range of conditions, because it's just going to it'll just be a tree that is more likely to be able to take whatever comes down the pike in terms of climate change and the conditions that it's going to find itself in. Okay. All right. Where am I? Now, all right. Come on. There we go. So, how can you share your newfound knowledge? Tree Canopy Fund. The Tree Canopy Fund is an Arlington program. In all honesty, I don't know how much longer it's going to be around because of funding, but it was created years ago from the developers who came in, and when they would clear cut lots in order to put their developments up, then they would, if they couldn't replant and replace those trees, they would put money in the Tree Canopy Fund. And then that money would then be used to plant trees on private land. And tree stewards would go out and talk to homeowners about what tree they would want. So that, as long, it's still going on right now. Like I said, I'm not sure what's going to happen to it long term, but this is a great way to get out and talk to people and share your newfound tree knowledge with them. Tree giveaways. This is, Alexandria does these, and so do we. Arlington folks also do these. In fact, there's going to be one in October for Arlington. This is where the county just buys small container trees and they just give them away. I mean, people sign up for them online and they'll have a list, and you can then just go and pick up your tree, and tree stewards are there to tell them how to plant them, tell them where to plant them, and give them any recommendations about that tree. So that's a great way to do it. There are farmers markets, there's home shows, there's the county fair. Anytime there's like a tabling situation, You can volunteer for that. We've got a lot of handouts and things that go with you, and people can just come and ask you questions, and you can talk to people and give them some good advice that way. And I do this like, how often do people really want your insights and opinions, you know? And this is an example of when they really, really do. And it's fun to talk to people and talk about trees. It really is. The other thing I do want to say about this is, because I still feel this way, and I've been a tree steward for a really long time, but it's like the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. Right. And it's very easy to feel like, oh, I don't know enough. You know, I've only been to a few classes. I can't go out and possibly give people advice on this. And the thing is, even with your few classes and everything else, there's 99% of the time, you're going to know a whole lot more than whoever it is you're talking to. And you will know about the resources where you can go and get them more information. And you can always go and talk to other tree stewards and stuff like that and get more information for people. So the more you do it, the more you learn and the more you know. And it's just it's one of the, I think, of the more just personally gratifying ways to do volunteer work with tree stewards. All right, so this is where we're going to spend a few minutes looking at a couple different options, and I hope you got the tree information sheet. Looks like this. It's Lori sent it out. It was attached to the link for the class. And this is the kind of thing that you would get if you were to go out and talk to somebody for the Tree Canopy Fund. And basically what it's telling you is it's giving you the Latin name, the common name, and then it gives you some information about that tree. How tall is it? How wide is it? What are the sunlight requirements? And then it gives you a description. You know, it does not tolerate compacted soil, or it really likes boggy areas, or it's a great wildlife tree. And we've got a bunch of shade trees on this. And then we have some shade trees that are smaller, which starts with your Eastern hornbeam and your American hornbeam. And those are some mid-sized trees. And then we have a third page that has a bunch of small trees on it. And these are just like, this is just kind of a little cheat sheet that I made up for different common native trees that we are often giving away through the tree giveaway or through the Tree Canopy Fund, or that you may very well, if your neighbor comes and asks you, what should I plant in my front yard? This is the kind of thing where you could say, oh, well, these look positive. Let me now go and do a little more research on it. And at the very bottom of it, I have all those guidelines, you know, 10 feet from the building and 15 feet from the overhead wires and that kind of thing. So that's what this is. So what I was going to ask people to do.
Hey, where was that? Because I only got the sheet I got was a visiting tree nursery that was linked to the agenda. I didn't see that, what you just held up.
Okay. It should also, well, Lori said it was also on the Google Drive, but it should have been attached to that email.
What you attached in the email requesting it be passed along was what I did upload.
Yeah.
It's on when you look at the Zoom link email, it is attached to that.
Right.
At the bottom. And I also put it in the resources folder. So if it's laborious to find that, you could just go to the Google folder for our group and you can pull it up there too.
Would you, Kate, may I have your permission to post it on my Instagram page and my Facebook page?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So what we're doing in this section is I'm just giving you a picture of somebody's front or back or side yard. I'm telling you what the owner is looking for, and I'm giving you some information about that site. And then I want you to just kind of come back and throw out some thoughts of some trees. And that's what this little information sheet is about. Of some trees that might actually work in that space, right? So in this situation, we've got a nice big yard with plenty of room for a big shade tree, which is great. The owner is looking for a shade tree that will get big enough to shade the sidewalk, and they want high wildlife value. And the good news is there's no wires, so we don't have to worry about that. There is a significant slope here. So we would say well draining, when it comes to soil, it's not going to be sitting in water. The house is facing, what is it, northwest? Oops, sorry. And it is adjacent. This is actually Wilson Boulevard. So it is adjacent to a busy street. So you've got some air pollution and that kind of thing. So does anybody have any thoughts off the top of their head of what might be a good tree for a situation like this?
Red oak.
Red oak would be good.
I started
That
to
would-
look at American Beach also.
An American beech, yes, because American beech, they don't like their compacted soil, but that could do quite nicely there. This is great because it gets a lot of sun and and you've got a big enough space for it.
How about a white oak?
A white oak would also work. That would also work. So would a scarlet oak. Pretty much, I would say most of your oak trees would be fine in a spot like this. This gives me a chance. Well, no, I'm going to talk about that a little later. Yeah, and oaks, when it comes to high wildlife value, oaks are probably about the best species that you can possibly do.
Would an
All
American
right.
hornbeam do okay?
The hornbeam is really great, and I love the hornbeam, but they kind of like it a little on the wet side, but the most thing is they like to have partial shade to shade. They're one of those trees, they're like my go-to tree for when someone wants a tree, but they've got shade, because it can handle quite a bit. I'm afraid, what I'm afraid of with the hornbeam is it would kind of fry here, and it's just would be too much sun for it. All right, good. Let's try the next one. All right, this is a little more difficult. So here they want a tree to attract wildlife. They have high overhead wires. You can see these. They have a flat area, and then it's got this steep slope. There's 15 feet between the house and the slope, and the house is facing east. So they're getting morning sun. They have these wires. They've really only got 15 feet to play with here. And you've got the wires that you want to be 15 feet away from. So you're pretty limited to being at the top of that slope or within 5 feet.
Serviceberry?
Yeah, serviceberry would work. It's a smaller tree. It can take some shade, and it'd be shaded from the afternoon sun because it's got that eastern position. That would work pretty well. And it has those berries that would attract birds.
How about dogwood?
Yeah, dogwood would do well as well. In fact, and dogwoods are great. I think there's like 42 different kind of birds that eats the dogwood seeds. It's really an amazing wildlife plant for, what is an understory tree. How about a redbud?
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, redbud. And in fact, redbuds, I think, they're an understory tree naturally, but they can also take a lot of sun. I don't know if you've noticed, but Arlington is planting a lot of them as street trees now. And at first I was kind of like, really, redbud? It just seemed like a kind of a strange choice. But I have to say I've been watching the ones in my neighborhood for the last 3 or 4 years, and they all seem to be doing really well, and they're in a full sun situation. Yeah, that would do well as well. Yeah, I think those are good. I think that perhaps a black gum could also work. The two trees that we have that are really, they're canopy trees, but they tend to be narrower. They're not as wide, which makes them very popular for these kinds of situations, are the black gum, the Nyssa sylvatica, which is a really pretty native tree. And if you find it on it's on the second page, second to the last one, Nyssa sylvatica. But you can see it gets 30 to 50 feet high, but only 20 to 30 feet wide. And it's a full sun to part shade. And it's a very pretty tree. And it gets these little droops that the birds really like in the fall. And it's one of the first trees to turn red in the fall. It's really quite beautiful. Slow grower. But that could work there. And in the oak family, the pin oaks are a lot smaller, narrower than most oaks. So they might be, if somebody is really set on having an oak tree, but they don't have a whole lot of space, pin oak could very well work in that situation. It's worth considering. All right, good. All right, this one, the owner wants fall color and something to look at in the winter. This is in a deep depression. I mean, the picture doesn't show it quite as much as it really is. So you've got this willow tree up top, and you've got this crepe myrtle here, and he wants some kind of tree for down here that would have some fall color and some winter interest here. It's next to the Route 66 overpass, and you got the southwest corner, so it's going to get quite a bit of sun here, even though you've got the crepe myrtle and the willow oak. So what would you consider? What's the first thing when you see a depression like that you're going to think about?
Riverbird.
But a pawpaw.
Ah, yeah, pawpaws. They like they grow next to streams, and they like to have some shade as well. But I think they would do fine in that situation. But the first thing I would think about is water.
River birch.
Yeah, river birch to me is the real obvious one there, because they want winter interest, and it's got the yellow fall color, but especially that peeling bark. And it's going to do well in that kind of boggy soil. What are some other trees that might do really well in that kind of wet condition?
The
And if
taxodium.
yes, the bald cypress, absolutely. And the willow oak. And another good one is, if they've got a lot of space, is the American sycamore. I mean, if you think about it, when you go through the park, start noticing about where trees grow, and you always see sycamores alongside the rivers. Now, here's one thing, though, that I wanted to tell you, because when I first heard this, I was just kind of blew my mind. But it's really true. Trees that can handle flooding, like your bald cypress and your willow oaks and your sycamores, are also really good in compacted dry soil, which makes no sense at all. But it does if you think about it for a minute. So if an area is getting flooded, all the oxygen is being forced out of the soil, right? So what do the trees need? Well, they need their soil for their nutrients. They need oxygen. They need water. And the problem with the boggy, flooded soils is it forces out the oxygen. And most trees are not going to be able to handle that situation. But trees that have, when you think about it, compacted soil, and they are able to handle those kinds of conditions. So if they are well established, they can do really quite well in really adverse kind of urban conditions, which is why you see these like American sycamores in a lot of these places, and they're nowhere close to water, but they're huge and they're doing fine. And part of it is because they have evolved to be able to handle those kinds of situations. And so those poor soils and the compaction and everything else is very much, as far as the tree's roots are concerned, not all that different than being flooded. And that's why Arlington is planting bald cypresses in the median strips now, like up on Wilson Boulevard and parts of Route 50. And when I first saw that, I was like, seriously, a bald cypress in a median strip on a road like this. But we'll see how they do. You know, it's interesting how these trees can manage. They evolved for one kind of environment, but they can take some of that, and sometimes it really helps them survive in others that are quite different.
Hey, can I ask you a
Kate, I have a
question about
Yeah.
the other, I'm so sorry. Sorry.
Go on, Joanna, go on.
The picture right before this, it was the front yard.
Yeah.
Would a cherry, but I don't see it on the right tree. Would a cherry be okay there?
Oh, okay. You mean the native black cherry?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it probably could. It probably could. You don't see that in commerce a whole lot, although you can find them. They're usually trees that you find out in the woods, but that would probably do fine. Yeah, and that is a keystone species and excellent for wildlife. Another one, and I don't know if it'd be so great right there, but another one that we sometimes are able to offer is hackberry. And that's a really high wildlife tree as well. But it's a little on the messy side, and it's not how can I say, it's not an elegant tree, you know, but it's an interesting looking tree, you know, so it's kind of a little on the scruffy side and everything, but really a tough tree, and one that is really great for wildlife. Okay.
Kate, I had
All
a
right.
question on the one just before.
Yeah, this one?
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out how much space there is between the two trees, and based on that car, it doesn't look like a lot of space. And if we were to suggest a river birch, white oak, willow oak, they get pretty, if they're mature, they're pretty wide. Would that still work?
I think it would. I think it's, you know, these, like I said, these pictures are a little on the deceiving side. This willow is a decent size. This crepe myrtle is really not very big. It's almost like a large shrub. And at this point too, considering the way crepe myrtles are going, I mean, I really wouldn't worry too much about the crepe myrtle. I think if you put a river birch in here someplace,
Yeah.
I think it would be fine. It probably will end up, I would warn them that it's probably going to end up shading out that crepe myrtle, because crepe myrtles, in order to bloom and, you know, really look their best, they really like to be in a sunny position. But that is a good point. That is a good point. You would have enough space to put it over here closer to the driveway. You'd have to measure that out. But that might be another option.
That would get the most water probably, right?
It probably would. It probably would. And then it would be further away from the crepe myrtle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Good point. I mean, you end up, you know, with your little tape measure, and it's kind of like, this isn't going to work. How about if we try that, you know, and you kind of go back and forth, and sometimes, and eventually you can usually find a spot where some tree that likes those conditions will be happy there, and it will have enough space. But it can take some real measuring and looking around and checking things out to see what will actually fit.
Yeah.
Kate?
Yeah.
If I could just make the point that having been through this myself, river birches, you know, you always see them with those multiple trunks, the 3 trunks usually, and they don't grow naturally that way. The nursery industry puts them together that way in the nursery to sell, but you can go to like a native tree or native plant nursery, and they'll sell the single trunk. And so they won't spread that much, and they won't fail like the ones that have been, put together.
Yeah. Good
I
point.
had a question about that, because I was walking the dog. Someone had told me that as well at the pruning, and I was walking the dog and I was looking at the bottoms, and I don't know if it's because they were buried together, but they look fused together. Like they look like one that and then it comes out and it looks like it branches out. Do they, if you plant them close enough, do they like kind of fuse?
Well, that's what the nurseries do. They fuse them in the pot. So, you know,
Yeah.
and then that makes like a
Yes.
weak crotch, and they spread because they lean out, and then they, like, somebody was saying, they spread and take up a lot of room. But if you get the single trunk, which is the way they naturally grow,
Right.
you're not going to have those problems.
Yeah. And in fact, if Arlington County plants the single trunked ones, because they are healthier, basically, than having the three glom together. Yep, good point, Noreen. Thanks. Okay, owner wants an ash tree because they had one when they were growing up. 25 feet between the house and the sidewalk, mostly flat, full sun. What would you tell them?
I think they have to be made aware of the ash disease that they face.
Correct. Right. The emerald ash borer. So, yeah, I know I said how tree stewards don't tell people what they can and cannot plant, but I don't even know if you could. Well, I'm sure somebody would sell you an ash tree, but yes, that would be strongly discouraged. But the good news is with this situation is really they could plant pretty much anything else on our list, except for the things like the Carpinus caroliniana, which like shade, and this would have more sun. But this is a fantastic spot for pretty much any tree. So that is the good news on that one. It's nice when you have all those different kinds of choices. All right, here's a different situation. They want shade, but they don't want a whole bunch of mess. This great cover is covering up stream and stormwater overflow. It's kind of on this slope here, full sun, relatively flat, no overhead wires, but not a really huge space. Any thoughts on that one?
Dogwood?
I think it'd be full sun. I wouldn't plant a dogwood in full sun.
Okay.
I think it would be I think it would fry out in that. How about your bald cypress? I mean, it does drop its needles, so maybe that would be too much mess, but it would grow there.
Do bald cypress, do their roots go crazy like a willows? Do their roots go towards water? Or I just really don't know, because
I don't really know. I'm trying to think of the bald cypresses that they seem to have fairly shallow roots,
oh,
so that might be an issue. That would take some more research. But I think a bald cypress would actually work there. Although they do drop their needles, and I don't know if that would be a problem for them. The river birch again, that could work. How about the basswood, your Tilia americana? It's fairly low drought tolerance, and it's in full sun, but I think this place probably gets some decent sun. So I think you've got a lot of different options that would actually work here. But you're right.
Pawpaw.
Pawpaw. Yeah. Pawpaws, out in their natural habitat, they're kind of an understory tree, and you usually find them along streams. But I have actually grown them on a hill where they never get water, and they're in tons of shade. It's like the more shade, the more rangy they get. But I've seen them out in the sun, and they look really great. So I think pawpaws could work there. That might be a nice nice one, although I'm not sure how much shade that would involve.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's quite a few things that I think you could consider there and show pictures and talk to the owner and find something that would work for them. Okay, here, once again, we're dealing with a pretty deep depression here. Owner wants a row of Bradford pears to screen the yard from the bike trail. So they're in a depression, they're adjacent to a park. There are high and low wires, and the house is facing west. So if I think about how that goes, so this is actually north. But you can see that it would be getting over here. It probably would not be all that much shaded by the house. It would probably get quite a bit of sun.
How about Amelanchier instead?
That's the really obvious one. I mean, it also gets white flowers.
Yeah,
and yeah. Yeah, and I think the Amelanchier, I think they would do fine. They also like to grow along stream banks. So I think, you know, being in that situation, they would probably do really well. All right, that is a good choice for that. And that's it. So does anybody have any final questions? Had enough? 2 hours is a long time.
Oh, but it's been great. I've loved it.
Really
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's really fun to get into it. I think learning to identify trees, you know, the whole tree ID piece, and then learning, you know, what trees like and where to look for them, which is also part of tree ID. You know, it's like you start realizing, oh, sycamores, they have that bark, and look towards the water and you're probably going to find them. You know, red maples, look up on the ridge, you know, that kind of thing. And then it's like, oh, well, I know how they grow in the wild. So, you know, when I'm looking in an urban setting, is this kind of the same conditions? And the only thing that, you know, and I don't think you can go wrong with that. I just think it's really that one exception, which was the trees that can handle flooding and yet can do very well in what seem to be the exact opposite conditions is kind of a good thing to know, because those are the real tough ones that can work pretty much anywhere.
Hey, Kate, at the beginning, you were saying something about trees that for screening, and that we don't have that many options, since, you know, for evergreen type stuff. And it hit
Right.
later. I know they get big, but if you have a big yard and you have the space, Eastern red cedar is a native.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yeah, it gets big, but it's pretty, and
Yeah.
it'll
Yeah.
stay evergreen.
What was that?
I said it would stay evergreen.
Yeah. Yeah. When you get into, I know you'll be talking about these. We have so many native trees. We don't have that many, what I would call your classic beautiful evergreens, right? So, you know, Eastern red cedar is very nice. I mean, it gets big. It's a great wildlife plant. The only thing about Eastern red cedar is if you have serviceberry, the Amelanchier, you get things with the cedar apple rust, which can really mess up your berries. The serviceberry berries are ripen in June. And they look like blueberries, and they are delicious, and the birds love them. But if you have cedar apple rust, which is this kind of just moves back and forth between the cedars and the serviceberries, or, you know, other type fruiting in the rose family, those berries, they're blue and they look like a coronavirus by the time the rust gets through them, because it's all these little spiky things that are orange. coming out of this blueberry. And if you see it, you'll be like, oh my God, that is so freaky looking. And you'll know that's exactly what it was I was talking about. And it doesn't hurt the trees, either one of them. It just kind of messes up the berries. And on the cedar side, you can end up with, some kind of like sappy, runny stuff on it, which doesn't look particularly nice. But usually, but that's the only thing about them is, if you really want to eat service berries, you might have a problem with that. But the eastern red cedar is a great wildlife plant. It is evergreen. I mean, the native holly we have is the American holly, but those things can get huge, very beautiful pyramid shape. But man, if they are a big tree. Yeah, and other than that, it's like, it's unfortunately it's just the arborvitae, which the deer love, and there are just not a whole lot. I mean, the pines that we have, the Virginia pine and a couple of others, they look great in the woods and everything, but I don't know if they're not going to give you the kind of screening that you would want. They tend to have a high canopy and drop their lower branches. Yeah. All right, well, thank you, everybody. This was fun. I hope I see you out there as we, as you go moving towards your training and your volunteer hours and everything else. And if you have any questions or you want some resources or whatever, especially I know this will be going up, but you can always just email me and I'd be happy to answer your questions as best I can.